Our staff members have committed their lives to being of service to those in our community who are hurting and who are in need. And I can't tell you how delighted I am to introduce you to one of those staff members right now. Michelle Sideroff is a licensed therapist who's been with NCC for about 4 years. She joined us from New Mexico, where she worked for many years with domestic violence survivors. She's recently also, in just the last couple of months, become the center's clinical manager, and I cannot tell you how happy we are about that. Please welcome Michelle Sideroff.
Thank you. And thank you, Erin. I couldn't be more excited and grateful for this opportunity to be in this new role with the center. And when I moved to Oregon, I was looking for a job. But I wanted a job that actually had the same vision and mission that I wanted to see in my work, so I could be supported in that and also support the place I wanted to work for and serve. And when I was looking for the job at NCC's website, hope and healing just looked like bold letters for me and drew me here, and which I've been thankful for 4 years later. And when we look at hope and healing, that doesn't come about without trauma. That doesn't come about without adversity, without struggle, without hardship, and without strength. And that's what we're kind of looking at highlighting today, speaking of circle of strength. But you need strength in order to have hope and healing. And part of what Erin's talking about is darkness. When you look at the stats, we're looking at really the core root of trauma, which we're going to do a little activity today. You might notice a little cup with Play-Doh waiting for you. Because we're going to do some visual representations of what we've been through in the pandemic, and also how your light to us helps shift things. So when we look at trauma, just kind of a basic description, we're looking for experiences or events that have been deeply distressing, disturbing events, high stressors, and that can be tied to trauma, that can be tied to loss. I also like to highlight exposure, because there's two different types of exposures. We look at direct, which is what we personally experience in our life, and then there's the indirect, and that is the witnessing that we all have done and seen what has unfolded in our loved ones, our neighbors, everyone here's lives. And it's important to count that, because sometimes we can minimize that, like, oh, it didn't happen to me, but I feel so bad, versus your body can't tell the difference. Logically, you can tell the difference. Body-wise, no, it feels all that cortisol pumping in that body. That's where you might notice, oh, why am I so fatigued? Why am I so stressed? And I highlight that because this is what us therapists and also anyone in the healthcare and the community, we've been facing together. And that's how come we're seeing, when we're stressed, that ripples onto our mental health. Trauma ripples onto our mental health. That's where we see more suicide, whether the thoughts are higher lethality. We see increases in substance use. During quarantine and lockdowns, people were home, and they were home drinking. And so then new habits start to form. And it's not because they want to be misusing alcohol, but these are the ripple effects of when we look at this communal experience of the pandemic. And this is what's driving the demand for healthcare. And that's why I want to highlight, like, doing this experimental piece with you today, to kind of have compassion for yourself, like, yeah, look what I've used my strength in overcoming. But also acknowledging, as a community, we're not immune. We haven't only been one. We've been together dealing with different types of traumas. And that's where we're looking at the surge kind of being contributed by two factors, but there's more than that. But the two factors I want to highlight. The current events have created trauma responses, because COVID in itself is basically a persistent, chronic, activating trauma. The other piece that we're seeing in the mental health care is these current stressors are bringing up past, unresolved, or possibly resolved trauma and grief again. And so you have people coming back wanting to deal with trauma like sexual violence that happened 10 years ago. Because, I'm powerless, stuck at home. I have no agency. I couldn't leave when I was being abused then. So I want to highlight that, like the links we're seeing, in female bodies, male bodies, all bodies, of how sometimes mental health is so linked together from our journeys from our past to our present. And something like the pandemic can kind of make people feel unraveled. And with the pandemic, we also can't ignore the chronic grief. And these numbers, they're more than that right now. So we're looking at over 1,054,443 lives that we've lost as a nation. Oregon, over 8,561 deaths. But that's not the full picture of loss. So when we look at this, our elders have been disproportionately lost in our communities. And for some communities, they are the language holders. So then we have communities that have lost their language. And so I highlight that because we're looking at the ripple effects that as a community that we see and sometimes we don't see also, of how come, why we're sad or why we're weepy or why we're irritable. Depression's not always sad. Depression shows up as annoyance and irritability and agitation. But we don't think about that. We think of Eeyore and the sad, slow walk, and it's like, oh no, depression can show up in so many shades. And also looking at the loss of safety and security. You, pre-pandemic, might have felt you had some safety and security in your body going to the grocery store. Now that was lost. Developmentally, we've lost 2 or 3 years with these kind of things of how we had to do actions to take care of each other, but a lot of people are sad that they're not where they thought they would be. I thought I'd be married. I thought I'd be further in my career. Now I don't have a job. And so there's also non-death loss that plays a role in the collective grief. And then the relational grief. Because whether death, distance, changes in mental health, we show up differently in our relationships now. And sometimes some are positive, but sometimes it can feel not good. You can feel like you've lost people. You've lost yourself and how you used to be in relationship. Now we have Zoom relationships. Not bad, but it's helped us keep connected. And so together, I would like for us to create a collective example of the impacts we faced during our trauma of the pandemic. Let's see here. It's not clicking forward. Am I not doing it right? Oh, thank you. So, at your table, your lovely container, it's like your body integrity in this container. There are 4 globs of Play-Doh. So what I would like you to do is right now we're doing trauma, we're not doing support. So I want you to pick 2 globs from your little lovely cup, and I want you to think of impact for each glob. So 2 globs, what are 2 impacts that you have faced in the pandemic? If you're comfortable, you can share it with your table, but I want you to see it, feel it, look at that color, and I want you to mix your colors together of the 2 globs. It's all right, you can share, and then I'll interrupt for the next piece. So we're doing it briefly. Sadness can be emotion. Financial, loss of job. Change in job. Mental, you might notice I am more sad. I am more irritable. Okay, how does that Play-Doh feel? Does it feel good? Nice and mushy? All right, I would like a volunteer from each table to collect all of everyone's little symbols of their impacts and mold it together into one ball. All right. Okay, I'm going to interrupt. Volunteers, if you can raise your ball of Play-Doh of impacts, that's representing your table community impacts. This is the collection of trauma and grief at your table. Then I'm going to have my assistant here, Annie, gather all of it because we're going to make our circle of strengths. Collective trauma and grief impacts. And she's going to mesh it all together for us. I'll take an editor. Ooh, this is lovely. All right, Annie. I'll just add that. Those are my 2. Oh, we got one more table. It's not forgotten. Our bodies keep the score. All right, Annie, let's mesh this up. Okay. Raise it up high. So this is our Circle of Strength collection of trauma, grief, impacts that we have faced. And it can be quite beautiful still. Look at all those colors mixed up together. And that's how our brain operates. That's why, like in the pandemic, Annie, can you touch the color, let's say there's pink right there, without touching any of the colors, without touching all the other stuff? No. So that's how trauma works. That's why we see the demand we do. Or you might notice, why am I so overwhelmed? It's because you can't touch it with touching all of it. Whether that represents one person's trauma history, or a community's trauma history, or a whole room full of trauma history. So I highlight that, like, so we can have compassion, like, you know what? Makes sense I'm overwhelmed today. Or it makes sense my neighbor's having a hard time. So this is part of that representing complex trauma. So multiple events, multiple symptoms, how it all wires together like it's one glob now. Touching it activates the whole system. And then one more forward. Aspera ad astra, Latin for through hardship, through adversity to the stars. So let's look at some light and stars right now. With your other two Play-Doh globs, I want you to think of two positives, whether, oh, I have more walks now, or I have work-life balance, or my faith is stronger now. Think of two positive impacts that you've had and mesh them together. Everyone, raise your balls at your table. This is to represent your table community support. And then Annie's going to collect them. So, ooh, another lovely, colorful representation here. All right, Annie, our lovely helper, is going to mold our Circle of Strength collection of tools and supports. And they can represent different pieces as well. But these are what our protective factors are. This is our light in the darkness. This is also how we heal, our hope in healing. And in our brains and in our bodies, they mesh together. They coexist. So light and darkness coexist. And that is no different than the sunrises and sunsets we love, which is where light and darkness cross paths. And I want to thank all of you for the light you helped bring us today to bring more light to our communities. So thank you.